Oh, do come in, dear. Mind the rug. It's a bit worn in that spot. There we are. Let me take your coat. The kettle is just about to sing. It's a cheerful sound, isn't it? I've always thought so, like a little bird in the kitchen, telling you something warm and comforting is on its way. Have a seat at the table. It's a chamomile day, I think. The world outside feels a bit too blustery and loud for anything stronger. You know, the sun came out this morning, for the first time, in what feels like ages. It was streaming through this very window, lighting up all the little dust motes dancing in the air. And it put me in the mind for something I haven't made in years. My mother's sunshine cake. It's a simple lemon sponge, really, but she gave it that name because she said it was impossible to eat a slice without feeling a little bit of warmth spread through you. I was just shuffling through my old recipe box here. Look at this mess. Papers and cards tucked in every which way. Ah, here it is. Oh my. Just look at it. The card is so soft and faded you can barely hold it. And the ink has gone all blurry from years of buttery fingerprints and, well, probably, a few tears, too. This old card. It holds the recipe for more than just a cake, you know. It holds the story of the bravest person I ever knew, and the moment I was at my very worst. It's the story of a promise I broke, and the 60 years it took to even begin to make it right. To understand it, you have to picture me as a little girl. Scabby knees, hair in two tight braids, living in a small town where everyone knew your business before you did. Back in my day, life moved at the pace of a wandering cat. We lived in a little cottage with a blue door, and the heart of our home was the kitchen. It always smelled of yeast and cinnamon and my mother's gentle kindness. She was a woman who believed most of life's troubles could be eased, if not solved, by a listening ear and something warm from the oven. And my dearest friend in the whole world was a boy named Samuel. He didn't live in the town proper. He and his family lived in a small, weathered cottage out by the whispering woods at the edge of things. They were a German family, you see, and this was the late 1940s. The war was over, but the shadows it cast were long and dark, especially in a small place like ours. People were suspicious. They'd mutter when Mrs. Schmidt went to the market, her English still thick with the accent of a place they only knew from the newsreels. But to me, Sam wasn't the German boy. He was just Sam. He was quiet and kind, with eyes that saw everything, and hands that were always creating something. He'd make little birds out of folded leaves that looked so real you'd expect them to fly away. He taught me the names of the constellations and which mushrooms were safe to touch. We had a secret spot, a hollow log deep in the woods where we'd share books and stories and the secrets that only children have. He was painfully shy, but with me, he'd talk for hours about the worlds in his head. And very often, I would bring a slice of my mother's sunshine cake, wrapped carefully in wax paper. My mother adored Sam. She saw the goodness in him right away. There's an old soul in that boy, Clara, she'd say. You be a good friend to him. A friend is the best torch you can have in the dark. Sam's face, when I'd bring out that cake, it was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. His own home, though clean, was a sad sort of place. His father was a grim, silent man, haunted by things Sam didn't understand. A simple piece of cake, a bit of sweetness, was a bigger treasure to him than you can imagine. We'd sit on that log, our legs dangling, eating our cake, and feeling like the rulers of our own little kingdom. It was our ritual. It was our promise of friendship. For a few years, our little world was perfect. It was safe, but childhood worlds are as fragile as a butterfly's wing. The trouble started the year I turned 10. A new family moved to town, and with them came a girl named Rosemary. She was everything I wasn't. She had shiny blonde curls that bounced when she walked, a wardrobe of new dresses, and a confidence that was both dazzling and terrifying. She decided who was important and who wasn't, and everyone, desperate to be warmed by her light, fell into line. I remember the first time she saw me with Sam. We were walking by the creek, and I was showing him a frog I'd caught. Rosemary and her new little court of followers were there. She looked from me to Sam, and her lip curled just a little. "What are you doing with him?" she asked, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. The way she said him made it sound like a dirty word. I felt a hot flush of shame creep up my neck. "He's my friend," I mumbled, my own voice suddenly sounding small and weak. Rosemary just laughed, a sound like tiny, sharp bells. "Don't you know where he's from?" she whispered to the other girls, and they all giggled. Sam didn't say a word. He just looked at the ground, his face pale. He let the frog go and quietly walked away, back towards the woods. I stood there, frozen, caught between two worlds, the safe, quiet world of my friendship with Sam, and this new, glittering, dangerous world that Rosemary was building. I didn't know it then, but a crack had just appeared in the foundation of my childhood, and I was the one who was going to let it break. After that day by the creek, things began to change. It wasn't a sudden shift, not like a door slamming shut. It was more like a slow, creeping frost. Rosemary's words had planted a seed of doubt in the town, and in the minds of the other children. Before, Sam was just the quiet boy who lived by the woods. Now, he was different. An outsider. The whispers followed him like his own shadow. At school, if he answered a question in class, I'd see the other children exchange glances. When we'd choose teams for rounders, he was always picked last. If he was picked at all, they started calling him names, cruel little rhymes they'd chant just loud enough for him to hear. I saw the change in him. The light in his eyes dimmed a little. He walked with his shoulders hunched, as if expecting a blow. He stopped bringing his little leaf birds in intricate drawings to our hololog, afraid they'd be found and destroyed. For a while, I tried to be the torch my mother told me to be. When the boys pushed him in the schoolyard, I'd march right up and stand between them, my fists clenched, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "Leave him alone," I'd shout, my voice trembling with a righteousness that felt both brave and terrifying. They'd back off, laughing at me now, too. Look at Clara, sticking up for the crowd. Being Sam's friend started to have a cost. I was invited to fewer birthday parties. The girls in my class would stop their giggling conversations when I walked by. I was being pushed out to the edges with him, into the cold. And oh dear, a part of me, a weak and shameful part, hated it. I craved the warmth of acceptance. I longed to be a part of Rosemary's laughing, popular circle. I started to dread the walk to school, torn between my loyalty to Sam and the deep, aching desire to just be normal, to belong. My mother saw the struggle in my face. One afternoon, she found me sitting on the back step, just staring into space. She sat down beside me, her hands smelling of flower and comfort. "Is it about Samuel?" she asked gently. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Being a good person is not always the easy choice, Clara," she said, stroking my hair. "In fact, back in my day, it was usually the hardest. But your character isn't defined by how you act when it's easy. It's defined by what you do when you're scared." She gave me a hug. "You have a good, strong heart. Just listen to it." Her words should have given me strength, but instead, they just added to the weight of my guilt. I knew what my heart was saying. It was saying, "Stand by your friend." But there was another voice, a louder, more insistent one, whispering, "Think of yourself. Don't let them cast you out, too." The battle inside me raged. I started to make little compromises. I'd still meet Sam at our hololog, but I'd look over my shoulder the whole way there, terrified of being seen. If I saw him in the town, and I was with other children, I might just give a quick, tight nod instead of running up to him like I used to. Each little betrayal was like a small stone added to a pile on my chest. Sam felt the distance growing between us. He became even quieter, more withdrawn. Our conversations in the woods, which used to be so full of imagination and laughter, became strained. "Are you angry with me?" he asked one day, his voice so small I could barely hear it over the rustling leaves. "No, of course not," I said quickly, unable to meet his eyes. "Don't be silly." But we both knew I was lying. I wasn't angry with him. I was angry at the situation, at the other children, and most of all, at my own cowardice. The sunshine cake became a symbol of my failing loyalty. I started to make excuses not to bring it. "Mum didn't have any lemons," I'd lie, or "We ate it all for dessert last night." Each lie was easier than the last. To bring the cake, our special ritual, felt like a hypocrisy I couldn't bear. It was a symbol of a friendship I was no longer brave enough to fully claim. The woods, our kingdom, began to feel less like a sanctuary and more like a place of judgment. The whispering of the leaves sounded less like secrets and more like accusations. The final test came in the autumn. Rosemary announced she was having a grand birthday party. It was the most anticipated event of the year. An invitation was a sign that you had truly arrived. I wanted one more than I wanted anything. I dreamed about it. The games, the cake, the laughter, the feeling of being on the inside, looking out. A few days before the party, Rosemary pulled me aside after school. Her eyes were bright with a kind of cruel excitement. "I know you want to come to my party, Clara," she said, her voice like, "Honey and I might let you, but first, you have to prove you're one of us. You have to prove you're not friends with him anymore." My blood ran cold. What do you mean?" She leaned in closer, her plan already fully formed. "He's always going on about that stupid hollow log of his. We're going to go there tomorrow after school, and you're going to help us." She explained her idea, a prank so mean, so personal, that it made me feel sick to my stomach. It was a direct attack on the heart of our friendship. It was a choice, laid bare, their world or his, the warmth of popularity or the cold of loyalty. My mother's words about being brave when scared echoed in my head, but they were drowned out by the roar of my own fear. I stood there, a 10-year-old girl with a war in her soul, and made a decision that would haunt me for the rest of my life. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. Every tick of the clock in our little hall seemed to be counting down to my own personal judgment day. I moved through the evening, and the next morning, in a fog of dread. At dinner, I couldn't eat. My mother put her cool hand on my forehead, asking if I was feeling ill. I just shook my head, unable to form the words to tell her the truth, to tell her that her daughter, the one with the supposedly good, strong heart, was a coward, that I was about to break my friend's heart for a slice of birthday cake and a moment of acceptance from a girl I didn't even truly like. When I met Sam at our spot in the woods, the lie was already on my tongue. "I can't stay long," I said, avoiding his gaze. "I have to help my mother with chores." He just nodded, his disappointment a quiet, familiar thing now. He didn't question it. He pulled out a piece of paper from his satchel. It was a new drawing, the best one he had ever done. It was a picture of our hollow log, but he'd transformed it. In his drawing, it wasn't just a log. It was a magnificent castle, with turrets made of twisting branches and flags made of autumn leaves. And standing at the entrance were two figures, a boy and a girl, holding hands. "Us, it's our kingdom," he said softly, a rare, proud smile touching his lips. "I'm going to color it tonight." Looking at that drawing, at the pure, innocent beauty of it, was like a physical blow. It was a portrait of the friendship I was about to shatter. I felt a wave of nausea. "It's beautiful, Sam," I managed to choke out. "Really beautiful." I made my excuses and fled, running from the woods as if a monster were chasing me. And in a way, one was the monster of my own weakness. I met Rosemary and her giggling, excited court at the edge of the schoolyard. My heart was a cold, heavy stone in my chest. "Did you see him?" Rosemary demanded. "Is he gone?" I nodded numbly. "Good," she said, grabbing my arm. "Let's go." Walking to that hollow log with them was a walk of shame. The woods didn't feel like my sanctuary anymore. They felt alien, hostile. The trees seemed to be watching, their branches like accusing fingers. I was a traitor in my own kingdom. When we got there, Rosemary didn't waste a moment. "Right," she said, her eyes gleaming. "This is his special place. Let's make it a bit less special." The other children, swept up in a tide of mob cruelty, started kicking at the log, pulling moss off it, and stomping on the ferns that grew around its base. It was a pointless, childish desecration, but it felt like a violation. I just stood there, frozen, unable to participate but too afraid to protest. "That's not enough," Rosemary declared, looking around. "What else is there?" Her eyes landed on Sam's satchel, which he had left tucked inside the log, as he always did. It was an old, worn leather bag that had been his father's. Rosemary snatched it up and dumped its contents onto the damp ground. Out tumbled a few well-worn books, a half-eaten apple, and his precious drawing of our castle. "Oh, look at this," she cooed, picking it up. She held it up for everyone to see. "Isn't that sweet? Little Clara and her little boyfriend." The other children howled with laughter, and then she turned to me. "The final test. Here," she said, holding out a fat, juicy worm she'd found squirming on the ground. "The price of admission, Clara. You have to ruin it. Smear this all over his stupid drawing." The world stopped. Everything narrowed to that piece of paper in her hand and the wriggling worm she was offering me. It was such a small thing. A piece of paper, a worm. But it was everything. It was loyalty. It was kindness. It was my friendship with Sam. I looked at the faces around me, all watching, waiting. I saw the expectation, the challenge. and I saw, in my mind's eye, a seat at Rosemary's birthday table. It's strange, the things we do when we're scared. It's a loneliness, isn't it? The fear of being the one left out. By the way, dear, this part of the story always makes me feel so far away. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. It makes this big old world feel a little less lonely, you know? I took the worm. My hand was shaking. It was cool and slimy against my skin. I closed my eyes and I did it. I dragged its muddy, writhing body across the surface of the drawing, right over the little figures of the boy and the girl holding hands. A thick, brown smear desecrated the heart of the picture. There was a cheer from the other children. Rosemary patted my shoulder. "There," she said, smiling. "Now you're one of us. You'll get your invitation tomorrow." But as I looked at the ruined drawing on the ground, I felt no triumph, no relief, just a cold, hollowing emptiness. The silence that followed their cheers was deafening, and in that silence, we heard a sound, a tiny, choked gasp. We all turned. Standing at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by a great oak tree, was Sam. He must have forgotten something and come back. He wasn't looking at Rosemary or the others. He was looking at me. His eyes were wide, and they were fixed on my hand, the one that had just destroyed his beautiful creation. The look on his face wasn't anger, it wasn't hatred. It was a look of pure, shattering disbelief and a hurt so profound it seemed to steal all the air from the woods. He didn't say a word, he just turned and ran. The sound of his footsteps, crashing through the undergrowth, was the sound of my world breaking. The children started to laugh, but it sounded distant and strange. All I could see was Sam's face. All I could feel was the slimy residue of the worm on my fingers and the filth that now coated my soul. I had my invitation. I had paid the price. And in doing so, I had lost something worth so much more. I don't remember walking home. It's as if my feet moved of their own accord while my mind was stuck back in that clearing, replaying that one awful moment over and over again. The look on Sam's face was seared into my memory. It was a brand on my conscience. When I finally stumbled through our blue front door, the first thing that hit me was the warm, sweet smell of lemon and sugar. My mother was just pulling a perfectly golden sunshine cake from the oven. She turned to me, her face beaming. "Look, Clara, I made your favorite. I thought we could take a big piece over to Samuel tomorrow. He's been looking a bit down in the dumps lately." Her cheerful words, her kindness, the very sight of that cake, it was all too much. The emptiness inside me curdled into a hot, sick guilt. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the cake as if it were poison. It was supposed to be a symbol of warmth, of friendship, of everything good. Now, it was a monument to my betrayal. "Clara, what is it? You're as pale as a sheet," my mother said, her smile faltering as she took in my expression. A single, wretched sob escaped me, and then another. The whole story came tumbling out in a torrent of gasps and tears. I told her everything. About Rosemary, the party, the pressure, the drawing, and the worm. I told her about the look on Sam's face. I confessed it all, hiding my face in my hands, unable to look at her. I expected her to be angry, to shout at me for being so cruel. But she didn't. She was silent for a long time. When I finally dared to peek through my fingers, her expression wasn't angry. It was one of profound sadness and disappointment, which was so much worse. "Oh, Clara," she said softly, sinking into a kitchen chair. She looked tired, suddenly older, to be cruel out of fear. "It's one of the most human and most heartbreaking things we can do." She didn't offer excuses for me. She didn't say, there, it will be all right." She just let the weight of what I had done settle in the room between us. "You need to make this right," she said finally, her voice firm. "You need to go to him, and you need to apologize. Not to get his friendship back. Not even to be forgiven, but because it's the right thing to do. You have to own your actions." The next day, as promised, an invitation to Rosemary's party was slipped onto my desk at school. It was on thick, pink card, with swirly writing. It felt like holding a hot coal. I looked across the room, at Sam's empty desk. He wasn't at school. My heart plummeted. That afternoon, I did what my mother said. I walked the long path to his cottage by the woods, my own heart thumping with a mixture of terror and a desperate need for atonement. I clutched a peace offering in my hands, a new, pristine sketchbook, and a set of colored pencils I had bought with all my pocket money. It felt like a pathetic, inadequate gesture. When I knocked on his door, it was his mother who answered. Her face was usually so timid, but today it was set in hard, protective lines. She looked at me, and I could tell she knew. "Sam must have told her he does not want to see you," she said, her accent thick with a pain that mirrored her son's. She started to close the door. "Please," I begged, thrusting the sketchbook forward. "Please just give him this, and tell him I am so sorry." She looked at the gift in my hands, then at my tear-streaked face. For a moment, I saw a flicker of pity in her eyes, but it was quickly extinguished. She took the sketchbook, without a word, and shut the door gently in my face. The click of the latch was a sound of absolute finality. I didn't go to Rosemary's party. The thought of it made me feel ill. I sat in my room, staring out the window, imagining the laughter and games, the popularity I had craved, the belonging I had paid for with my own integrity, now tasted like ash in my mouth. I had betrayed my only true friend for nothing. Worse than nothing. I had traded a kingdom for a handful of dust. Sam didn't return to school for the rest of the week. When he finally did, he was a ghost. He wouldn't look at me. If we passed in the corridor, he would turn his head or stare fixedly at a point on the far wall. It was as if I had ceased to exist. The invisible wall between us was now made of solid stone. The silence from him was a constant, screaming rebuke. The sketchbook I had given him was never mentioned. I never saw him draw again. The worst part was that my new friends were as fickle as the weather. A few weeks after the party, Rosemary found a new target for her cruelty, a younger girl who was clumsy. She found a new court favorite. I was quickly relegated back to the fringes, no longer useful. The brief, sour warmth of her approval was gone, and I was left with nothing but the cold, hard knowledge of what I had done. I was alone, utterly and completely alone, in a prison of my own making. And the ghost of a boy who used to be my friend walked the halls of our school, a living reminder of the day I chose fear over friendship. The months that followed were the loneliest of my childhood. The world that had once been so full of color and adventure had been rendered in shades of gray. My friendship with Sam was a gaping wound, and his determined silence was a constant application of salt. I tried a few more times to speak to him, to catch his eye, to offer a pathetic, pleading smile. Each attempt was met with a blank wall. He had erased me from his world, and I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that I deserved it. I retreated into myself. At school, I kept my head down, did my work, and spoke only when spoken to. The other children, sensing my misery, mostly left me alone. I was no fun anymore. I was a ghost, just like him. Our shared haunt was the schoolyard, where we would stand on opposite sides. Two lonely islands in a sea of noisy, carefree children. My mother watched me with worried eyes. She never said, "I told you so." She just continued to be a quiet, steady presence. She'd leave a cup of hot chocolate on my bedside table, or suggest we go for a walk, just the two of us. She was trying to teach me another lesson. One I was only beginning to understand, that after you've made a terrible mistake, the only way forward is to learn to live with yourself, to find a way to be a better person because of it. Not in spite of it. One afternoon, I came home from school to find a moving van, a rare and momentous sight in our little town, parked outside the Schmidt's cottage. My heart stopped. I dropped my school bag on the pavement and just stared. Men were carrying out their sparse, worn furniture. Mrs. Schmidt was directing them, her face pale and strained. I looked for Sam, but he was nowhere to be seen. I ran home, my chest tight with panic. "They're leaving," I cried to my mother, bursting into the kitchen. "The Schmidts are leaving." My mother sighed, wiping her hands on her apron. "I know, dear. Mr. Schmidt got a job offer in a bigger town up north, a factory job. They're leaving at the end of the week." The end of the week, it was a deadline. A final, absolute end to any hope I had of ever making things right. My chance was slipping away. He was leaving, and he would take his silence and his hurt with him, leaving me with nothing but the bitter dregs of my regret. I had to do something. I couldn't let him leave like this. I couldn't let the last memory he had of me be my face, twisted with fear, as I ruined his drawing. For 2 days, I wrestled with what to do. An apology seemed so small, so useless in the face of what I'd done. Then I remembered the sunshine cake. It was the symbol of our friendship. the one I had desecrated through my cowardice. Maybe, just maybe, it could be a symbol of my remorse. I went to my mother. "Will you help me?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Will you help me bake a sunshine cake for Sam?" A slow, sad smile touched her lips. "Of course, Clara," she said. We spent the afternoon in the kitchen. A place that had felt gloomy for months, but was now filled with a fragile, desperate hope. We measured the flour, creamed the butter and sugar, and zested the lemons. My hands, which had been so clumsy with betrayal, were now careful and focused. With every stir of the spoon, I poured in my apology, my regret, my unspoken wish for his happiness. When the cake came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, it was the most beautiful one we had ever made. The next day, the day before they were due to leave, I wrapped a huge slice of the cake in fresh wax paper. I wrote a note, my tenured hands struggling to form the right words. "I am sorry, Sam. I will be sorry forever. I hope you have a happy life. Your friend, Clara." The word friend felt like a lie, but I wrote it anyway. A prayer, more than a statement. I walked to his cottage one last time. It looked even sadder now, with bare windows like empty eyes. I could hear the sounds of packing from within. I stood on the doorstep for a long time, my courage failing me. What if he wouldn't take it? What if he slammed the door in my face? Finally, I took a deep breath and knocked. It was Sam who opened the door. He was holding a box of books. When he saw me, his face, which I had so longed to see, became a shuttered mask. He didn't say a word. I brought you this," I stammered, holding out the clumsily wrapped cake and the note. "For the journey." He looked at the package, then at my face. For a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Sam, a hint of sorrow in his eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by that same cold, distant emptiness. He shook his head once, a small, sharp movement. He didn't take the cake. He didn't take the note. He just looked at me for a moment longer, then gently, silently, closed the door. I stood on that doorstep, holding my useless offering, and listened to the sound of his footsteps walking away on the other side. That quiet click of the door, for the second time, was the loudest, most definitive sound in the world. It was the sound of forgiveness denied, the sound of a friendship being buried forever. I turned and walked away, the unwrapped cake heavy in my hands, a symbol not of hope, but of a wound that would never, ever heal. You know, it's a funny thing about regret. You think it will fade with time, like a photograph left in the sun. But some regrets don't fade. They just sink deeper, becoming a part of the landscape of who you are. The memory of that closed door, of Sam's silent rejection, became one of those features in my own landscape. It was a shadowed valley I would find myself wandering into at the quietest moments. Life, of course, went on. I grew up. Rosemary and her fickle friendships faded into the background of adolescent drama. I made other friends, good friends, but I always held a part of myself back. The experience with Sam had taught me a harsh lesson about my own capacity for weakness, and it made me cautious. It also, I think, made me more compassionate. I found I had very little tolerance for bullies, or for the casual cruelty of cliques. I would always find myself drifting towards the quiet ones, the outsiders, the ones sitting on the fringes. I suppose I was trying, in my own way, to be the friend to them that I had failed to be for Sam. I finished school, found a job at the local library, and eventually, I met your grandfather. He was a good man, a farmer with hands the size of dinner plates and a heart to match. He was steady and kind, and his laugh was the warmest sound I'd ever heard. We fell in love, got married, and had your father. I lived a good life, a happy life, full of love and purpose. But even on the sunniest of days, in the midst of laughter and joy, the shadow of that little boy with the haunted eyes would sometimes fall over me. Every time I baked a sunshine cake for a church fete or a family birthday, I'd see his face. I'd remember that perfect cake I'd offered him, and the quiet finality of the door closing between us. The what-ifs were the worst. What if I had been brave that day in the woods? What kind of man had he grown up to be? Was he happy? Did he ever draw again? Did he ever forgive me? The not knowing was a dull, constant ache. When I was in my late 50s, your grandfather had passed away, and your father was grown with a family of his own. I found myself with more time to think, to remember. The regret, which had been a quiet hum for years, grew louder. I was tidying up the attic one day when I came across a box of my old childhood books, and inside one of them was a pressed leaf, one that Sam had given me to identify as silver birch. Holding it, so brittle and fragile after all those years, something inside me shifted. I couldn't carry this regret to my grave. It was a debt I had to at least try to repay. Apologizing as a 10-year-old girl was one thing. Atoning as a grown woman was another. I decided then and there that I had to find him. Back then, you couldn't just type a name into a machine and find someone, you know. It was a detective story. I started with what little I knew. His family had moved to a factory town up north. I wrote letters to the records offices in a dozen different towns, trying to find a Schmidt family who had moved there around 1952. It was a long shot. A search for a needle in a haystack of common names. Months went by. A few polite letters came back, saying they had no records. I was beginning to lose hope. I had almost given up when a letter arrived from a small municipal office in a town called Mill Creek. It was a town built around the textile industry. Its clerk, a kind woman who must have been bored that day, had taken an interest. She wrote that a Schmidt family had lived there, and that their son, Samuel, had won a regional art prize in high school before the family moved on again in the early 60s. An art prize. He had kept drawing. The relief and joy that washed over me was so intense it brought tears to my eyes. He hadn't let me, or the other children, destroy that beautiful gift he had. The kind clerk had even enclosed a newspaper clipping about the prize. It had a grainy photo of a serious-looking teenage boy Sam. This new clue gave me a new path. I started writing to art colleges, galleries, and publishing houses. My quest became about finding an artist named Samuel Schmidt. It took another year of dead ends and frustrating silences. And then, one day, a reply came from a small publisher of children's books. Yes, they knew of a Samuel Schmidt. He was one of their illustrators. He was a quiet, almost reclusive man who lived several states away. They couldn't give me his address for privacy reasons, but they said if I wrote a letter, they would forward it on to him. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it, my one chance. What do you say to someone after 50 years of silence? How can you bridge a chasm that wide? I sat with a pen and paper for days, writing and rewriting, crumpling up sheet after sheet. Finally, I realized I couldn't write a letter that would fix anything. I could only write one that was honest. I told him everything I remembered. I told him about my cowardice, my fear, my shame. I told him how his silent, closed door was a memory that had shaped the entire course of my life, making me, I hoped, a better person. I didn't ask for his forgiveness. I had no right to. I simply ended by saying that I had thought of him often, and I had always hoped he'd found happiness and that his life was filled with beauty and art. I sealed the envelope and sent it off. And then, I waited. Waiting for a reply that you don't expect to come is a strange kind of purgatory. Every day when the postman came, my heart would give a hopeful little leap, and every day it would settle back down when there was nothing but bills and circulars. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. I began to accept that my letter had been my final act of atonement, and his silence was his final answer, and that was all right. I had said what I needed to say. I had owned my mistake across a lifetime. The shadowed valley of regret in my soul didn't disappear, but it felt less dark. A little bit of sunlight had found its way in. I had resigned myself to never hearing from him, and then, one Tuesday afternoon, nearly 3 months after I'd sent my letter, I found a small, brown paper package on my porch. It had my name and address written in neat, architectural printing. The return address was just a name, S. Schmidt. My hands were trembling so much I could barely get the string undone. I took the package inside and sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd confessed my sin to my mother all those years ago. Inside the wrapping was a book. It was a children's book, beautifully made, with a thick, glossy cover. The title was The Castle in the Woods. My breath caught in my throat. On the cover was a stunning, vibrant painting. It was the hololog from our childhood, but transformed into the most magnificent, magical castle imaginable. The turrets were gnarled oak branches, the walls were mossy stone, and the flags were brilliant crimson and gold autumn leaves, catching the light of a setting sun. It was the drawing he had shown me all those years ago, brought to life with a breathtaking beauty that only decades of practice and a deep, soulful talent could produce. It was his masterpiece. With a shaking hand, I opened the cover to the title page. And there, on the crisp white paper, was an inscription written in that same neat, architectural hand. It wasn't long. It was just a few words. But they were the most powerful words I had ever read. It said, "For Clara, the sun came out again." Sam, I sat there, in my quiet kitchen, with tears streaming down my face. But these weren't the tears of guilt or regret. They were tears of gratitude, of release. He was telling me that he had healed. He was telling me that the darkness had passed. And in his own quiet, profound way, he was telling me that he had forgiven me. He hadn't forgotten. The castle in the painting was proof of that. He had taken the most painful memory of his childhood, the site of his deepest betrayal, and he had transformed it into a thing of beauty, a source of wonder for children. He hadn't erased the memory. He had redeemed it. And that, dear, is the lesson that took me a lifetime to learn. That's the real secret in this old recipe card. It's not about the cake. It's about courage and forgiveness. I used to think courage was about not being afraid. I thought the brave thing to do was to stand up to Rosemary in that moment, without a tremor of fear. But I was just a scared little girl. Maybe true courage isn't about the absence of fear. Maybe it's about what you do long after you've given in to the fear. It's about the quiet, difficult, lifelong work of making amends, of owning your failures, and of trying to become a better person because of them. And forgiveness, well, I learned that forgiveness is a quiet, patient thing. Sometimes it doesn't come in a grand speech. Sometimes it comes in a children's book, in a few simple words that say, "I healed. You can, too." Sam's forgiveness wasn't just a gift to me. It was a gift he had given himself. He refused to let bitterness be the final chapter of his story. He chose to create beauty from his pain. That is the bravest act of all. I never saw Sam again. We never spoke, but we didn't need to. That one book, that one inscription, was an entire conversation. It was a bridge across 50 years of silence. It was peace. So now, when I look at this old, faded recipe card, I don't just see my mother's handwriting. I see a story that reminds me that it is never, ever too late to try to make things right. It's never too late to say you're sorry, and that the most broken parts of our past can, with time and courage and a little bit of grace, be built into our most beautiful castles. Now then, I think this sunshine cake is just about ready, and I do believe the sun is still shining. Then, a slice,